Thank you, Prabhu. Great to be with everyone. Hare Krishna. Good morning. Welcome to Srimad Bhagavatam class. It's great to be with all of you again. Oh, it's an honor and really a privilege to be sitting at the lotus feet of Shri Radha Muralidhar in New York City, even virtually, and Shri Gaurachandra, Sringadev, Shri Prabhupada. Really happy to be here. We'll dive right into this 16th chapter of Srimad Bhagavatam and share some realizations, and I want to hear from all of you as well. We dive in, just do some invocation prayers. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. So we're reading from the 16th chapter of the Srimad Bhagavatam, the 7th verse, and the 8th verse as well. Hopefully everyone can see my screen here. And I'll go straight to the translation because my Sanskrit's not so great. Just go straight there. So we're reading on the pastime of Kaliya. Just started this, of Krishna chastising the Kaliya serpent. And we're just getting started with this story, or I guess we're somewhat through it, but in the middle of that story. Translation. When the Supreme Personality of Godhead landed in the serpent's lake, the snakes there became extremely agitated and began breathing heavily, further polluting it with volumes of poison. The force of the Lord's entrance into the lake caused it to overflow on all sides, and poisonous, fearsome waves flooded the surrounding lands up to a distance of 100 bow lengths. This is not at all amazing, however, for the Supreme Lord possesses infinite strength. So Krishna entered this lake, essentially. This last verse before this, it's mentioned, as we looked at yesterday, that Krishna climbed up to this very high Kadamba tree, and he tightened his belt, he slapped his arms, and he jumped into the poisonous water. And this is where he's landed in the water. And when Kaliya feels that someone has entered his lake, the snakes became extremely agitated. So this lake became further and further toxic with the poison of the snakes. We have verse 8 here. When Krishna lands, translation, Krishna began sporting in Kaliya's lake like a lordly elephant, swirling his mighty arms and making the water resound in various ways. When Kaliya heard these sounds, he understood that someone was trespassing in his lake. The serpent could not tolerate this and immediately came forward. Purport. According to the Acharyas, Lord Krishna was producing wonderful musical sounds within the water simply by splashing his hands and arms. So I'll read these translations again very briefly. Text 7. When the Supreme Personality of Godhead landed in the serpent's lake, the snakes there became extremely agitated and began breathing heavily, further polluting it with volumes of poison. The force of the Lord's entrance to the lake caused it to overflow on all sides, and poisonous, fearsome waves flooded the surrounding lands up to a distance of 100 bow lengths. This is not at all amazing, however. The Supreme Lord possesses infinite strength. In text 8, again, Krishna began sporting in Kaliya's lake like a lordly elephant, swirling his mighty arms and making the water resound in various ways. When Kaliya heard these sounds, he understood that someone was trespassing in his lake. The serpent could not tolerate this and immediately came forward. Okay. Do some further invocation prayers and jump into this story and see what we can take into our own hearts and our minds and our own meditation on Krishna in this pastime.
There's a visitor here. His name is Antonio. He's never been to Bhagavatam class before.
Wonderful. So welcome, Antonio. Thank you for joining.
Yes. What's your name? I didn't catch it before.
Anuj.
Anuj.
Yes, nice to meet you, Prabhu. Om Agyantamirandasya Gyananjana Shlakaya Chakshuru militam yena tasmai Shri Guruve namaha. Nama Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prishtaya Bhutale Srimate Bhakti Vedanta Swami Niti Namine. Namaste Saraswati Deve Gauravani Pracharine Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Pashatya Deshadarine. Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shivasadi Gaur Bhaktavinda. Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. Vanchakalpa Trubhyasya Kripa Sindhubhya Vicha Patitanam Pavanevyo Vaishnavevyo Namo Namaha. Jai Shri Prabhupada Ki Jai. So thank you all for being here and listening very attentively and giving your energy to Srimad Bhagavatam class. It's the best way to really start off the day. You know, I was just thinking that often, you know, we want to start off the day with a workout or with maybe we're cooking something, which is all there, taking care of our health. But actually listening to Srimad Bhagavatam is such a great way to start the day, because we get to hear this sound vibration of the Bhagavatam, these verses, the wisdom of the sages, of Srila Shukadev Goswami, and this dialogue that's occurring, and these wonderful pastimes. Especially right now, we're in the 10th canto. And so we're just going through so many of these very, very significant and meaningful and very love-filled, rasa-filled pastimes of Krishna in the 10th canto. So it's really a treat. I'll share a couple bits of realization from this pastime. And I was listening to some of the classes that were recently given in this vein. And so it'll be some similar themes, and then we'll expound upon them. And I would love to, for those of you who have been on when I'm giving class and sharing, you know that my style is interactive, and I love hearing from all of you. So please, I'll try to end early so we can have some questions and comments, some thoughts. And then also, please go ahead and write into chat if things are resonating with you, if you have any questions, any of that as well. So we're again in the 16th chapter, the Kaliya pastime. For those who aren't familiar, Kaliya was a serpent, and he was through this. There's a backstory to this, which is a little bit not complex, but a little bit longer. But essentially, he was trying to hide from Garuda, who is the messenger, carrier of Lord Vishnu, and he knew that if he was hiding in the banks of the Yamuna, this lake off the Yamuna, in the Yamuna, that he'd be protected from Garuda. And so he made his home there and his family, and he made this underwater city, which is actually quite mystical and incredible. And so Kaliya was hiding in this lake, and Kaliya had, and the description is given in we're on the 7th and 8th verse, but in these earlier verses from 1 through 7, there's a description given of how poisonous Kaliya, how much poison that he had that was emanating from his body, and it affected the entire lake, and not even just the lake and the water of the Yamuna, but it affected even the land and the vegetation around the Yamuna. So there was no, really, besides that Kadamba tree, which is, I believe, still there, it's still there. There wasn't anything that was able to really grow in that area. And it's said in these earlier verses that there was so much poison, it was bubbling up, these vapors. It was bubbling up from the Yamuna. And even when birds would fly across the river, they would just die. They would come in contact with these vapors, and these vapors were so toxic that the birds would immediately die and fall into the Yamuna. And so we can see that this is a very toxic situation, actually, a dangerous situation, just for even life to survive around this Yamuna. And this is all emanating from Kaliya, his serpents, his beings, his subjects, and all of them living in the Yamuna, essentially. And I think this was mentioned in some of the other classes earlier, and we'll talk about this further, that Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur, and we have the pastime itself, which is extremely relishable. And we have Krishna now jumping into the lake. right? So his playful confidence is there. He's jumping in, he slaps his arms, tightens his belt, jumps in. And when he jumps in, then he starts to make musical sounds to announce his entrance to Kaliya, right? So letting him know, I'm here now, right? And Kaliya is very agitated, and even more poison is coming. Even though Krishna is there to really help him, to liberate him. And it's stated that Bhaktivinoda Thakur mentions that each of these pastimes, these occasional pastimes of Krishna, they represent a different anartha that's being dealt with. And for those who aren't familiar with the word anartha, and we have some of those who are newer on our call as well, and some who are been around for many, many years, anartha essentially means unwanted conditioning. We've all got unwanted conditioning through our experiences in life, in this body, in our mind. And some of that conditioning is helpful for spiritual realization, and some of it's harmful for spiritual realization. It's not helpful. And so these are anarthas, that which bind us and condition us, and that actually hurt us in our spiritual growth and progress. And each of these demons, if you will, you could say, represent a different anartha. And it's mentioned, I think Vasudeva Prabhu gave a nice class yesterday around this pastime, and it was mentioned that Kaliya represents this anartha of cruelty or brutality. It said brutality, cruelty, and also treachery, which is this idea of like crookedness and duplicity, right? These two anarthas, our tendency for cruelty, brutality, and duplicitness based off of an envy or a pride. And I was thinking that when we think of this pastime, the poison that we see in Kaliya's lake is not so different than, and this point's been made, and I think I'd love for us to meditate on this in this class and go a little deeper with this point, that's not so different from the poison that maybe we can emanate sometimes in our own heart or in our own mind that's there, right? This poison that's mentioned, that's bubbling up in the waters, these pure waters of the Yamuna, and it's threatening all of life around it, whether it's the plants, the trees, the birds, insects, everyone's being affected. The Rajvasis are being greatly affected by this vapor, this poison, right? So we can think about in our own spiritual life, when we think about this process of anartha and vritti and of purifying ourselves on the path of spiritual realization, let's do some inner reflection, because this pastime is also giving us an opportunity to do that. We think about these two areas of anarthas that Kaliya represents: cruelty and treachery, duplicitness, based off envy. We think of the poison in the lake, in the river Yamuna. Let's think about the poison that we can sometimes emanate, right? So I wrote down a couple areas that I feel this can come across, and it's not sometimes that we intend to have these conditionings or anarthas, but they develop. Whether it's our past actions, well, generally it's our past actions, whether it's our past association, whether it's our past habits and choices that we make, whatever the case might be, these anarthas start to develop within us, within our mind and heart. And just like this poison of Kaliya was corrosive, was toxic, these two can be toxic for our relationships, in our community, and our spiritual life. So the first one is I was thinking there's in terms of poison, we can do some reflection on this. The first one that came to my mind was resentment for others, whether it's ourselves or even other devotees. That's something that needs to be very carefully guarded against, this resentment that can come within us, of feeling like I'm right, they're wrong, they're not doing it right, I'm doing it right, right? I'm the only one who knows what to do, etc. Or feeling like people are not supporting us, or these perceived injustices that we can feel. The second is a tendency, this is important, and I wanted to mention this, but a tendency for criticism and fault finding. Tendency for criticism and fault finding. This can also be a poisonous attitude in our own spiritual life. Now, I want to make a point here that there's a difference between fault finding and constructive feedback. getting constructive feedback and guidance is actually essential for our own spiritual growth. But criticism, just undue criticism and unchecked criticism, it can be very harmful, actually. And constructive feedback done in the right mood is actually a symptom of genuine love in a relationship in many ways. And the person who's being corrected can feel uplifted in many cases and should feel uplifted, not put down. And so the reason I want to bring this up is sometimes in our mindset, we can think that we're doing one and we're actually doing the other. We think sometimes we're providing constructive criticism, but we actually might be fault finding based off these narratives of cruelty, of envy, of duplicitousness, etc. That can kind of subtly be there sometimes, right? And sometimes we're doing it the other way, right? So we have to be mindful of this. And I believe it was His Grace Gaur Gopal Prabhu. He mentions that I really wanted to share this today, actually. There's 5 questions that we can ask ourselves when we're kind of distinguishing between this criticism and this constructive criticism, if you will, fault finding and constructive criticism, constructive feedback. He mentions that there's 5 questions we should ask ourselves before we are able to share with someone else, to make sure we avoid this poisonous mindset that can be lurking behind the scenes. So if we're giving someone constructive thought, we should first pause and ask yourselves, am I the right person? First question, am I the right person? Maybe I'm not the right person to be giving this feedback. The relationship matters between devotees, between 2 individuals, even in a secular sense. Maybe there's someone else who has a better relationship, who's maybe more respected for this individual, that they would maybe listen to, potentially. Am I the right person? The second question is, do I have the right motive? And this goes back to what we were just talking about. Sometimes when we're fault finding or giving constructive feedback, the motive, we just check in with ourselves. Are we looking to get even with someone? Are we envious of this individual? And we want to say that we're giving them some constructive feedback, but we are actually fault finding. We want to put them down. We want to put them in their place so we can feel better about ourselves, right? Can feel superior, can feel justified. So do I have the right motive? Am I looking just to get even, or do I actually want to help this person grow genuinely? It's the second question. Third question, is this the right time? Is this the right time to correct this individual or to give this feedback? Sometimes we might have the best feedback, or we might have the best thoughts and ideas for others, even in our community, but we do it at a time that's not so convenient, right? The example is given, I think Gopal Prabhu was mentioning this when he was giving this example, that one time he was giving class and he was giving lecture, and right after the lecture finished, someone came up to him and immediately gave him, a couple points of feedback around that lecture. And while those points the motive was right, the points were wonderful and were salient, the timing was off because he had just finished. He just had finished the class. And, when you're doing your best, there's also a little bit of space that's needed for you to be able to digest that feedback and for it to be received in the right way. So maybe if it was given the next day versus just right after class, it would have been able to be digested, right? So we can see in our own life where sometimes we speak to others or sometimes we want something to happen and we try really hard for it to happen, but the timing is just not there. And then at another point, the timing is just right and everything happens very smoothly. So we should also look at this. It's mentioned in the Gita, there's 5 factors to success, right? And timing, divine timing, is essential as well. And then a couple other questions. Am I saying it the right way? Sometimes our motive is correct. Sometimes we have a wonderful insight to share, but am I saying it in the right way? The way I'm saying it to others, is it done in the right way? There's a story that came to mind when I was thinking about this and writing just a few notes. When Srila Prabhupada's guru, Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, he had a disciple, And basically, and please correct me if I don't get the story right, but I've heard this many times, the story. It's a wonderful story. There was a temple opening, and all his disciples had invited Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur to this temple opening. And his disciples had worked for weeks and months to put on this event. And essentially, one of his disciples of Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur had some inappropriate interactions. A brahmachari had some inappropriate interaction with some woman in the temple. And the other devotees, the other brahmacharis, the other monks were very upset by this, naturally, of course. And they very severely chastised him, right? And very severely told him that those inappropriate, etc. And so much so that they went so overboard with this chastisement that this brahmachari lost his heart to actually stay in the ashram, and he left. He just left. He broke down in tears and left, and was not to be seen again. And the devotees were thinking, okay, that was a little strong, but needed to be said, and he left. Okay. And so Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur was coming for this temple opening just after this incident. So he comes and he looks around, and the devotees are thinking that because we've had all these elaborate preparations for this program, that our guru's mind is going to be on the program. He doesn't know about this incident. It's going to be on this program. And they had, the deities, they had all the devotees, all the prasad, all the decorations, so many things were there for this opening. And Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur looked around the room, and there was all these people there, hundreds of people also from outside, and devotees as well for this opening. And he called over some of his disciples and he said, "Where is this brahmachari? I don't see him anywhere. Where is he?" And they realized that he was aware of something happening here, and he could notice that he wasn't there. So they told Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur that this incident happened, and we chastised them. We were a bit intense, a bit strong. It was very strong, and he went away. But this, he didn't do the right thing, and we have this opening, so let's focus here. And Saraswati Thakur became very grave and heavy, and he said, all of this temple, everything we have, all the stuff that this new project, this material, this construction, means nothing to me. Means nothing to me compared to this brahmachari, who I love very dearly. And yes, what he did was not correct, but the way that he was dealt with broke his heart, broke his spirit to actually stay with us, to be with us. And so I want to stop this whole program, and we have to bring him back immediately. And so, there was I think there was a little bit of a debate between the disciples, and they're like, no, we can go. No, he said, no, bring him, then I will continue this program. Unless he's here, I will not continue the program. So these disciples of Saraswati Thakur had to go out into the marketplace in the town, and they went from store to store trying to look for him, see where he was. And finally, after some time, they found him at, I think, like a watchmaker's shop, if I'm not mistaken. And he was just working there. He came straight from the temple and was working there. And they begged for forgiveness to him. They begged for forgiveness on how they said what they said. And after the forgiveness had taken place in this conversation, they brought him back, and Saraswati Thakur embraced him and allowed him to return to the temple. And then the program continued for this temple opening. The reason I shared this story is that, going back to, am I saying it the right way? This brahmachari had committed some offenses, with inappropriate behavior for a brahmachari, but the way he was dealt with broke his spirit, broke his heart, and actually moved him away further from the devotees, from his spiritual life, from the temple. And Saraswati Thakur saw this and corrected his disciples on, yes, he made a mistake, but the way it was said was not correct as well. So we have to be really mindful of this. When it comes to these, we're talking about the poison, sometimes that we can emanate even in our own community or in our own heart. We have to look within. Sometimes it's how we're saying something, not what we're saying. It's how we're saying it. So we have these 5 questions, just to recap. Am I the right person? Do I have the right motive? Am I trying to get even? Am I trying to sincerely actually help someone? Am I saying it the right way? Is this the right time? And is this the right place also? Am I saying it at the right place? These 5 questions are essential as we think about when we're giving constructive feedback, or it can get into this area of fault finding, which it can be very dangerous for our spiritual life, or fault finding with others, and looking for mistakes and faults just to keep people down. The third kind of poisonous mindset I was also thinking about was this tendency for envy or false pride and arrogance. So Kaliya represents this as well. Tendency for envy and false pride. So I'm right. And it's interesting, false pride and arrogance, and then envy, they all come from a very similar place. This sense of insecurity within us, actually. There's false pride and envy. Sometimes it looks like people who are arrogant are very confident. They might seem very confident. But actually, when we're arrogant, there's a lot of insecurity within us that we haven't dealt with. There's a lack of love, lack of connection, particularly to Krishna, but in general, that we're masking, right? And same thing with envy. When we're looking at what others have, come from a place, again, of insecurity as well. And then lastly, this kind of another toxic or poisonous mindset is comparing or being condescending toward others. Comparing ourselves with others and being condescending also to sometimes the devotees. Let's say someone can't do what we're doing service-wise, or someone has their own limitations. We should not put anyone down for what they can do, what they can't do. Everyone's doing their service, and Krishna sees that service on the best of their abilities. And even we should not put other people down outside of our community as well. There's actually this, we talk about envy, and I was studying this book. It talked about emotions, and there's another emotion which is related to envy. So we talked about resentment, talked about envy, talked about false pride, and there's another emotion, if you will, that's the cousin of envy. It's called Schadenfreude. It's a German word, and it means to take pleasure. It means to take pleasure in someone else's distress. This is also a poisonous mindset. We talk about cruelty that Kaliya represents. The Schadenfreude is this idea that it's greater than envy. Envy is that we want something that someone has, but when envy gets really deep and poisonous, we actually are happy to see others fail. We derive a certain pleasure from that, actually, from others suffering, from their failure, from their setbacks, from their challenges. And this again is a mindset that needs to be very much looked at, because that can poison the sacred waters of our own heart and our own mind as well. So I wanted to just pause there for a second. And the reason I'm sharing this is that I've been thinking about this a lot lately. And for those of you who know me, I'm a very honest, generally, and direct person. But I've been thinking a lot about how it's important that we cultivate these mindsets and are mindful of these anarthas, because also there's this tendency to project outward. What we haven't really made peace with internally, we tend to project outward to others, even other devotees. And so sometimes we can accuse others of being arrogant, of being envious, of being resentful, right? All of these things, of being cruel, right? And maybe that's the case. Sometimes we can all exhibit these behaviors, but we should also look in our heart and see, do we honestly have any of these tendencies within us as well? And if we're really honest, the answer will probably be yes, we do, to some extent or another. And with that level of acknowledgement and awareness, then we can actually continue to move forward in our spiritual life. So that's really important. That sometimes we tend to project outwards and say that, this devotee is doing this, or that person is doing this, or they're have so much pride and arrogance, or they're showing off, and it's bothering us. And what's interesting is that what bothers us about others, and many devotees have made this point, And also it's there in psychology in the secular world as well. But what bothers us about other people can actually be found within ourselves. It's something that we're probably still struggling with within us. And it's present within us. And we haven't really made peace with it. We haven't really worked on it. We haven't really accepted it and worked on it in our own spiritual life. So we have to be really mindful of this. And the reason this comes up for me even stronger is that Srila Prabhupada mentioned this, and I've read it in many different places, that this movement that's very special can only be destroyed from within, actually. The discord within that can occur can be very dangerous, can be destroyed from within, not from the outside, from within. And I believe the forest fire in Vrindavan that takes place right after this pastime, actually. So we won't get too far ahead. But after this of Kaliya is chastised, there's a forest fire that occurs when the Vrajavasis are sleeping. And Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur states that first forest fire represents intercommunal discord among the Vaishnavas. Forest fire, right? So that's very dangerous, actually. And I can see that even nowadays, everyone's got so many different thoughts on so many different things, whether it's politically, in and outside our community, whether it's, we have so many different things going on health-wise, whether it's different stances on different issues, right, that we have that are very hot topics, very maybe sensitive topics there. But one thing I was thinking is that despite our desire to sincerely serve Srila Prabhupada, and we might have our own strong views, it's so important that we come together in the spirit of how we come together is done right. It's not done with this poisonous mindset, but it's done in a spirit of wanting to learn and grow with each other, actually, right? And sometimes when we're not careful, quite frankly, you can see this sometimes even on social media or on different platforms where people are interacting, it can become quite poisonous because we're not mindful of the way we're interacting with each other, actually, in our Sangha, in our communities. And this is a very dangerous, again, the poisonous waters of the Yamuna with Kaliya, and then the first forest fire are both dangers. Again, Srila Prabhupada said that this movement can be only destroyed from within. So we have to take great care to tend within ourselves, and then we can tend within our community as well. And ultimately, I want to wrap up. Ultimately, this starts with cleansing our own heart. Jeto darpana marjanam, bhava mahadavagni nirvapanam, right? Srila Mahaprabhu in his Shikshashtakam mentions that in this blazing forest fire of material existence, this blazing fire of material existence, we have to cleanse our own heart. Chittadarpana marjana. And how do we do that? We talked about today many different ways. And Param Vijayate Sri Krishna Sankirtanam. Chant the holy names of Krishna. Cleanses the mirror of the mind, of the heart, slowly and quickly as well. So this is key. And this will also help us. And I was thinking of just two things. One is that I want to give everyone a little bit of homework and exercise also as well. Sometimes we come into class, we share with each other, we have some different notes, but sometimes we don't, if we're not listening carefully enough, we don't walk away with any application in our life. It's important that we do. So I wanted to give everyone a little exercise and homework that in this spirit of working through these anarthas, we should also know what we're doing right and wrong. And wanted to actually encourage and suggest everyone on this call, like this Bhagavatam class homework, if you will. Let's all go to one person that we trust. Doesn't have to be a stranger, but one person that we trust. And honestly ask for their feedback on 3 areas for us. Just in a couple minutes. It doesn't have to be a long thing. But go to one person that we trust, that we can take their feedback. We know that they have the right motive. They're the right person. It's the right time, the right place. They're going to say it in the right way overall. And we should ask them 3 things. Please take this if you like, but I encourage everyone to do it. I'll also be doing this. We call this I do this with some of my some of the people I work with as well. We call this start, stop, and continue. So we can go to someone we trust in our community, maybe someone senior, and ask them, what's one thing I should start doing that you're noticing to help myself grow spiritually, my relationship with Krishna? What's one thing I can start doing? Then what's one thing I should stop doing? What's one thing I should stop doing? You know me quite well, in and out. What's one thing I should stop doing that I'm doing? What's one quality, one habit, one behavior that's taking me away from Krishna, taking me away from my spiritual life? And then what's one thing I should continue doing that I'm doing well, that I should continue doing service-wise? Maybe it's a quality I'm cultivating, whatever the case might be. So start, stop, and continue. A simple question, 3 questions. Should take just maybe max 5 minutes with someone, but please do this. We'll be really surprised. We often don't take the time to really ask people around us who really care about us, who have the right intentions. We assume, but we don't take the time to really ask them what they think in terms of our own spiritual development. And what we can get from them can be very valuable for our own spiritual life, actually. Srila Prabhupada mentions, someone asked Srila Prabhupada, I believe this is in Gainesville, and they said, how would we know a genuine follower of yours, true follower? And Srila Prabhupada did not say that they would be well-versed in all the Vedas, that they would do elaborate, they would know all the elaborate rituals, Vedic rituals, that's there, and samskaras and deity worship. But what he did say was that they would be a perfect gentleman. And we've also applied this the other way, and perfect lady as well. Vaishnavi, Vaishnava, and Vaishnavi. They'll be the perfect gentleman, he says. And so we should keep this in mind, that that's what actually Srila Prabhupada wants for us, that we should be that. And that way, people can actually be inspired by the principles of Krishna consciousness. Going back to this, the first forest fire of Vrindavan, this intercommunal discord, that it can, if we have, we have this such a beautiful philosophy, we have such a beautiful practice, we have kirtan, we have so many different Srimad Bhagavatam, we have the best of everything. But if we can't get along, if we can't work together, if we can't cooperate, like Srila Prabhupada asked, then it doesn't set the right example the Srila Prabhupada wanted for us. And it can be very poisonous, again. And then lastly, I just want to end with Krishna. We have to always keep Krishna in the center. This poison might be there, in the river, in our own heart and mind. We work on it. We bring in Krishna's holy name. We become aware of where we are and bring in Krishna, and there can be all auspiciousness, because actually for Krishna this is nothing. We see how he deals with Kaliya, and no one wants to go near the river because it's so poisonous, right? None of the Vrajavasis, all the insects and animals, whatnot. But Krishna is able to go, and actually Krishna is very playful when he's going into it. Even with Aghasura's pastime, we see all the pastimes. Krishna's not very concerned, and if he's even concerned for a second, it's part of the Leela. But he comes in and he jumps on the Kadamba tree and he slaps his arms like a wrestler. He tightens his belt, and then he jumps in and he starts making noise in the water. So Krishna is actually not very he's not very concerned in many ways, actually, because he can deal with Kali. He knows how to deal with this poison, this toxic poison that can come up very easily, actually. So that's our hope, that we do our part, we do our work, and we bring Krishna in the center. Both things have to be there. And then all auspiciousness can be there. So I want to end with that. I hope that could offer something of insight and value from this pastime of Kaliya. Thank you very much. And we talked about a couple different things. We'll just briefly recap and then open it up for any comments, questions, thoughts, feedback as well. We talked about, again, this pastime, Krishna jumping into the river, and we're still getting to where he's going to actually chastise Kaliya, if you will. But he's just jumping into the river. We talked about this anartha that is represented. Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur talks about in Sri Chaitanya Shikshamrita, that this anartha of cruelty, brutality, and treachery based off envy, is there for Kaliya. We talked about the poison that's there and how there's many different ways we can see that poison in our life, in our own hearts and minds, whether it's resentment, tendency for criticism and fault finding, in the place of even sometimes constructive feedback, tendency for envy, false pride, tendency for being condescending or comparing ourselves to others. We gave this story of Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur and one of his disciples, brahmacharis, who was dealt with in a very harsh manner. We talked about the 5 questions that we should ask ourselves when we are giving even some constructive feedback. Are we the right person? Do we have the right motive? Is it the right time? Do we have the right method? And is it the right place? As well, from His Grace Gaur Gopal Prabhu, really love those questions. And we talked about how this poison can fester and become part of the intercommunal discord. Talked about the first forest fire in Vrindavan and how that's not very helpful for our spiritual life and for those around us as well. And ultimately, we need to really be mindful of that. We talked about this whole little homework exercise, which I hope you all take. I'll definitely be doing it as well. Start, stop, continue. One thing we can start, one thing we can stop, one thing we can continue. Speaking heart to heart with maybe a mentor or someone that we can take guidance from. And ultimately, Srila Prabhupada wants us to be perfect in our behavior more than anything. And then everything else will come as well. Guy, thank you all very much for being here today. I'll open it up for any thoughts. Ribo.
Thank you, Anuj Prabhu. Great class. We're opening it up. Please, temple room. We're supposed to ask you first. Do you have any reflections or questions for Anuj Prabhu? Unmute, Adi Prabhu.
I comment in the chat about I take shelter of Guru. Like Prabhu was saying, asking advice. We relish Vaishya Shekhar Prabhu saying, I'm here to be corrected. We say, I know. Then there's no openness for improvement. And the questions are very profound about, it says we're not supposed to instruct someone who's not our disciple. The motive is so important, that there's love and the intention is for the benefit of the person. It's not just me thinking I'm better than anyone. And then we would ask a 5th question to ask, what does Krishna want me to say? We were doing a japa walk and I came upon a dead bird that had this vegetable garden field, and they had red nets over the rows of vegetables, and one bird had left his body. And then a little further along, I saw a bird entangled under the net. So I went there to try to free him, and as I got close, he was more afraid of me than his near-death experience being entangled in the net. So it was awkward, but I went, spoke softly and moved slowly and released him. So sometimes we approach someone even with the best intention at a time when they really need it, and sometimes they won't take it properly. They'll think we're just trying to put them down. Like Vidura, he was called to speak in the assembly when they were radically trying to strip Draupadi, and they didn't want to hear it. And it wasn't easy. It wasn't popular. But he said, Lord, what do you want me to do? And then he did the best, follow those 5 questions, But sometimes the person just doesn't want to be corrected. But we must speak truth to power, even in an awkward situation like that, and say, well, Krishna, if that's what you want me to do, I'll do. So we pray like that. On Sankirtan, we say, Lord, I have no qualification to speak to this person. I'm here on your behalf. Let me dance as you like. And there'll be definitely a spectrum of receptiveness. But we want to pray to Krishna. What do you want me to say?
If we don't know what to say, then we can just dance.
Self-help program. Let me examine myself and say, those are all true. But ultimately, Krishna will, what do you want me to say? I'll say that. Anyway, there's not contradicting anything, but we gave an excellent class. Very nice. Everything very true and profound and accurate and helpful. But we also want to just add, Krishna, what do you want me to do? My ability to see my own faults may not be that complete. Oh, glory to Srila Prabhupada, Hare Krishna.
Krishna wants Jamuna Jaya to say something. I
Yes.
feel. Unmute yourself.
Hare Krishna. Thank you, Anuj. As always, I am going to do that exercise. That's so wonderful. That's so great. But I was thinking, I was in another discussion about envy earlier in this week. And what we were talking about, and it occurred to the group, is like, in a way, envy is a lack of faith. We were thinking that that is really like this lack of faith that Krishna knows best, that the Krishna has my plan and not another person's plan in mind. And that was really so illuminating to me. And something that Ganyara Swami Maharaj was about the faith thing, he said, like, just the day after, was saying that there was this scientist being interviewed, and the scientist was being asked, he asked, do you believe in God? And he took a long time to answer, because he said, I have to ask myself, do I? By how I actually behave. Like, it's not enough just lip service. Do I actually believe? So those two things were just clicking as you were speaking. So thank you so much.
Thank you. It's always an honor to have you. And that's so true. These questions actually force us to go deeper in our own practice. And we can see like how kind of insincere some, or maybe like shallow sometimes our practice can be, actually. So it's very meaningful to ask ourselves these questions. Thank you. Jai.
Thank you. I once had a devotee, and back in the day, I thought that they're a little arrogant, and they walk like they own the place. And then I kind of completely wrote this person off of my life. I said, this devotee, let's be respectful in the distance. They're arrogant. I was thinking like that. But then years later, I got to do some service together with that devotee. And then I discovered that this devotee is a gem, he's a jewel. So devotional service is the key, right?
Yeah, it's true. And your point is very valid, that sometimes we make up our own stories based off what we see in our own heart, actually, maybe sometimes, or maybe some of our past experiences of what people can be. And then we realize that actually we were maybe totally wrong, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, exactly. And that's actually even more dangerous, because meaning when we're not giving others a chance to show who they are, other Vaishnavas or even other people in our family, friends, whatnot, and just maybe like write them off in our own mindset as well, and which you didn't do in this case, which was wonderful for you to be open to that. We got a question from Jeff, looks like his hand's raised.
Jeff, what do you?
Oh, you're on mute.
Bhima Prabhu, unmute yourself.
Yes.
Yes, Haribo. Haribo. Wonderful lecture. It's nice to have a little, I better make this quick. I think the conch is going to blow. So I have no one. I'm out in the middle of nowhere, and I refuse to listen to my wife. So I went to the mountain, and the mountain here, as you can see, I'm going up it. I asked what I should start, and the mountain said, start climbing me. And I asked what I should continue doing, and the mountain said, continue and don't continue all the way up. And then I asked what I should stop, and the mountain said, stop at the top and look out over this world, over the 50 miles that we have a view of from the top of this peak, and see how insignificant you are.
Mm.
And that should just about take care of everything you need to know.
Mm.
So that's what came to me when you gave us that homework to do. So, teacher, I am at my homework now. Please give me a good grade.
Thank you.
Hare Krishna.
So quickly. Also, actually, nature is an incredible teacher, right? So, like you said, maybe we're not always around other people. We can learn from nature. And the other thing that we can learn from is also, first off, we can always find someone in our life for sure. there's nature as well, but then also we can see the areas in our life that aren't working as well as we'd like. If we see like some of our relationships are really getting challenged, we can see that there's probably some work that we need to do there. There's something that we need to learn there. Maybe we're struggling a little bit spiritually. Okay, we can see that there's something there. So we can kind of like, one suggestion for those of you, not just Bhima Prabhu, but like just anyone who here is trying to figure out, okay, what are those areas? Start, stop, continue. Personally, I found a good starting place. Obviously, talking to others is such a valuable perspective. We can also do our own self-reflection on our life. See, okay, what are some areas that have been sore points, pain points for me in my own life, in different areas, and they can start from there as a little canvas, actually.
Bhima Prabhu, don't climb that mountain alone. Help another devotee. Once you get there.
I just realized my plan was not to go to the peak, but then I opened my mouth and now I got to go to the peak. I was going to turn around halfway through, and then I said something, and now I'm obligated. Just see how it works out. Hare Krishna.
Yeah. There's a question in the chat from Kartik. Thanks for this awesome class. What did Kaliya do to represent treachery, which means betrayal of trust?
It's a good question. So I would answer like this. I don't know enough about Kaliya's like whole backstory. That's what Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur mentioned in Chaitanya Shikshamrita. So on the strength of his analysis, we'll take that. I will say that based off Kaliya's mindset, that was, first off, he was very puffed up. And we'll see this later in this chapter with the prayers of his wives and as well to Krishna, and how Krishna spares him and dances on his hoods. He's very puffed up. He's also envious, and pride comes from also envy, actually, one of the origins of pride. And so we can see that like when any of us are in that state of like that kind of material ego, false ego-based consciousness, we tend to be duplicitous, actually, because we're always thinking of our own gain, right? Like you have even in the backstory, you can see that, Kaliya, he has to like protect himself and whatnot, but he leaves from where he's formerly from this island, right? And he comes to Yamuna and like destroys the entire river, with just like just not the entire river, but the area he is, because he's hiding from Garuda, actually, right? But so the point that I wanted to make is that anytime we get into this kind of ego-based consciousness, we tend to be duplicitous because we kind of view like life as a zero-sum game. Others are either our enemies or they're our friends because they're helping us get what we want, what we need to really like either survive in some cases, but also in some cases for our false ego and for what we need to feel good and feel like we're satiating our arrogance or our false pride or envy and whatnot as well. So we can see that in his example, and we'll see that further in this chapter with the prayers of his wives to Lord Krishna as well. But that's kind of like whenever we're in that state of consciousness, we tend to view others in that way, for gain or for like Srila Prahlad Maharaj says that a true Vaishnava, and Bhagavatam mentions that true Vaishnava, friends and enemies are an illusion for actually a true Vaishnava, because they're not in that like ego-based material consciousness anymore. Seeing people in that way, right? So there's no duplicitness they have to have because they don't need anything from anyone, really. There's no agenda, there's no like ulterior agenda behind their actions. Versus when we aren't, then there's always some level of like manipulation that we have to do to create the optimal circumstances around us for our ego, for our false ego. So I hope that answered your question. Thank you for that.
Thank you. Great class, Anuj Prabhu. Great, and thanks for including the audience in your session. It's always nice to be
Taking your
included.
feedback, Prabhuji, as well, including the audience, more and more.
Yeah. Okay, Bhakti Yuga, do you have anything to say? Yeah.
Safe travels, Jamuna Jaya, on your trip. Where are you going? India?
Yes, I'm going to Puri, Vrindavan, and Govardhan.
Amazing. I wish I could be there with all of you.
Pray for us, Jamuna Jai. Pray for
I'll
us,
take
okay?
everybody with me. You
Bring
pray
us
for
with you.
me. Pray for me, and I will miss you all.
Will you be tuning into class, Jamuna Jai?
I will try. I will try my best. We'll see what the time, how the time works out, but I will try.
Okay. All right. We trust you on that. Thank you. Dr. Hugo. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna. I'm appreciating your plan and the Bihari Prabhu about the devotee that, you kind of wrote off and then you got to be with, you're like, oh, wow, this is a very nice devotee. And I'm just reflecting how many times that's happened in my life. We forget that people are people. We, in Prabhupada's Pranam mantra, we have Nirvishesha Shunyavadi. Prabhupada came to defeat impersonalism and Buddhism. Sometimes we think of it as this big abstract idea, the Advaitavad, the Mayavad. But impersonalism just seeps into like all of our interactions. That's the society we create. I was reminded of one TED talk I heard, and it was from someone who was previously part of a neo-fascist organization. And then they got out of there. And they shared their story. And after that, they dedicated their life to bringing other people out of neo-fascist organizations. And at one point, he was meeting with one of his old friends who was a fascist. And so they were, aggressively against, oh my goodness, like all races, all religions, all whatever, except theirs. They had this conception. And they were talking, and this person was speaking very badly about Muslims and all the terrible things that Muslims do and how horrible they are and what have you. And then this person who was giving the talk, he asked his friend, well, have you ever met an imam, like a Muslim person? Like, have you ever spoken with them? And this person says, no, why would I ever speak with an imam? Why would I ever do that? And this person said, oh, okay, just give me one moment. And the person called the nearest synagogue, or not synagogue, mosque. He called the nearest mosque. And he arranged for a meeting with the imam. And then he came back to his friend, the fascist. He said, hey, I've just put forward an appointment with the imam of the local mosque. The friend gets outraged, like, what? How could you do that? This is horrible, and all this. I mean, he was just so aggressively there. But he gave in, he was convinced. And so they met the imam. And over the course of an hour or two, they learned about the Muslim faith and they became best friends. And now this prior fascist started just meeting with the imam, and they every now and then regularly they would just have lunch together, hang out, and what have you. And the person giving this TED talk who facilitated all this, he made this observation that the biggest problem we have is that we just forget that people are people. Sometimes we look at people and we think, oh my goodness, this person is arrogant, or this person is rude, or this person is, so many things. But if we just get to know them, we realize that, wow, they're people. They have desires and wants, and they have things they like and dislike, and they have, a story behind them. And most importantly, just like me, they're a child of Krishna. And if I can relate to them on that way, I mean, we're all trying our best, and we all have our imperfections, but I'm appreciating that. And then on Anuj Sharma's class, I'm also reflecting how Prabhupada was a perfect exemplar of time, place, and circumstance. I recall one time when he was in India, somewhere in India, and a sannyasi came into his room, and Prabhupada was kind of chastising him. He said, you're a sannyasi. You should go out and preach. Be distributing, preaching. What are you doing here? Go out and preach. And the sannyasi said, okay, I will do that. And then later in the day, another sannyasi came. And Prabhupada said, what are you doing? You're a sannyasi. You're supposed to be a leader. Stay here and manage. Set a good example for the devotees. And then the sannyasi left. And then Prabhupada's personal servant asked him, Srila Prabhupada, the first sannyasi came and you told him to go out and preach. And the second sannyasi came and you told him to stay here and not go anywhere. What's the deal? And then Srila Prabhupada chastised him. And he said, what, do you think your guru is a rock? He can't give a different instruction for two different people? And we see that for devotees that could handle, some heaviness. Tamal Krishna Goswami, he's a prime example. Prabhupada would be, oh my goodness, he would just pound him into the ground sometimes and really tear into him for his poor decisions. But then other devotees will remember that they were skittish, they were shy, they were uncertain, And when Prabhupada dealt with them, he was very loving and just caring, and they always felt like they were being held like a kitten. And so, yeah, that's the prime example, the Acharya that we can strive to follow more and more. Hare Krishna, Prabhu. Thank you for your class.
Thank you. I love that example. It's so nice. And it's very true. I think that sometimes we tend to become impersonal. I love that point that we just talked about, that even these principles that we're talking about, they need to be applied in time, place, and circumstance. And it's different for different people, and how the balance is in art and science both. The point I also loved you mentioned around the Imam and this friend as well, meeting and really opening his mind. It reminded me of a quote that I had heard actually a couple of years ago, but it really stuck with me in a lecture, not in our community actually, but with a workshop that I was part of. That the lady who was leading it, she said that we're talking about relationships with others, especially people we don't know or maybe have some uncomfort around. And she was saying that it's very easy to hate others from afar. It's very hard to hate people up close. And like you mentioned, your story is a perfect example, Dr. Hugo, of that, where this person didn't want to meet that individual, or had never met an imam or whatnot from a different faith. And so it's easy to have all these stories, these conceptions that they're this, and they're this. And some of those conceptions might come from genuine examples or some stories that happen in certain places, but that's a generalization that's being made of an individual. And so like you said, when we take time to get to know others and see their heart, we can see Krishna in everyone's heart, and we can see their heart as well, of how everyone's just human, and we're all just trying to figure this out, and we're all just trying to live and be the best we can be, generally speaking. So love that. It's hard to hate people when we're up close to them. It's something I always kept in mind, really, actually. And I think actually even Abraham Lincoln mentioned this quote, the US president. He said that he once remarked that, "I don't like this man, but I must get to know him better." So that's how we get rid of this poison, essentially, as well too. Anyway, I know we're well over time, bro. I think we're like stretching the class each time like a little bit more, a couple more minutes. At 9 a.m.
But it was great. It's worth it. It's Saturday. Everybody's sleeping in, so it's fine. It's all right.
Yeah.
Problem. Anuj, Sharma, Prabhu, thank you very much. Beautiful class, practical, applicable, Shastra-based. Nice. Thank you. And inclusive. Thank you. Imams, fashion. Everyone on the call, love each other, serve together, get closer. Like Srila Prabhupada wanted us all to get closer to Krishna and to one another. So let's get closer, more love, more service. And thank you very much for being steady part of this family. Bhima Prabhu, Jamuna Jaya, Ambika, Sharita, Rich and his herd, Yogeshwari, Angel Prabhu, Suzanne, Amish, Amrita Kishori Didi, yes, Amrita Kishori, Kartik, William Prabhu and family, Dana Krishna's Radharani, Pink Yogi of Harlem, you got in. Pink Yogi of Harlem. Thank you so much. Thank you. Okay, have a wonderful Saturday. Come again tomorrow. Srimad Bhagavatam never ends. Srila Prabhupada ki jai, Anuj Prabhu ki jai. Hare Krishna.
Haribol, everyone.